FAQ PhD. Namaste. Conversation today is for scholars who plan to get enrolled in a PhD program or are already into it. Hopefully, the FAQ will answer questions with which every scholarship struggles. Guide today is Professor Himanshu Vaidya, who literally has been a PhD guide. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, can we start with what a PhD program is all about?
We look into the whole gamut of education, the entire arena of it. We see three things there. As a student, we basically learn three broad categories of things. One, receiving knowledge. Somebody is giving us knowledge and we are receiving knowledge. So how good a student we are is based upon how good we are in receiving knowledge. This goes up to the master's level. After the master's level, we have to get into creating knowledge. So there is an area of being a student where we receive knowledge, and there is an area where we create knowledge. And there is an in-between thing, learning how to create knowledge. So till master's program, essentially we are learning knowledge. In PhD, we are supposed to create knowledge. And for creating knowledge, we are supposed to learn how to create knowledge. So if you look at all the PhDs, ideally, they are all supposed to create new scientific knowledge. And we have to go slightly here into what is new and what is scientific, because that is very important in the area of PhD.
Right.
New does not mean that you do something obvious which nobody has done and call it new. Like if I ask somebody, what will happen if you mix sodium chloride and calcium chloride and you boil it to some X degree, put it in Y pressure, and then add elements 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in some proportion at some sequence. Now, maybe nobody has done it, but does not mean it's undoable or something new. It's new to somebody who has not done it, but it can easily be done. It is obvious. It is not something which takes great effort. So first, when we say PhD is to create new scientific knowledge, first let us look at the word new. New means, one, it should not be obvious which somebody has not done, but is easily doable. Which means new is referred to as something which is new to the person who is in that area. Like some professor who has done his PhD 10 years back and has been in that area, or somebody who did a master's in that area, has been practicing for 15 years in the industry, and it is new to both of them, which is not obvious. So new means, one, it should not be obvious, and two, it should be novel enough for those who are into the area. The legal expression of the phrase is new to the person skilled in the art. A person who is skilled in the art, in the experience in the art, to him it should be new. So PhD means creating new scientific knowledge, and one element of new is it should be new to the person skilled in that area. Two, it should not be obvious. Many things are there which people have not done, but they are obvious, anybody can do it. Like if I ask somebody, what is 2 raised to the power 5, the whole divided by 13, square root of that. Now nobody would have done it probably, but it's not undoable, it's very easy to do. So just because it is new does not mean it is meaningfully new. So we have to look at meaningfully new. So something which is not
Does,
yeah.
and does that mean that we are in a PhD? It's not something which was never there. It is something which was already there, now there, but now we are establishing it in the light of the realm of the subject, along with some more facts.
It can be both ways. And that will take us into the types of PhDs that are done. It may be something completely new, or it may be something which is partly new. But it should not be obvious in any case, and the knowledge that we generate should be new to the person skilled in the art. That is one part. The second part has to do with being scientific. So we are generating new knowledge which is scientific in nature. It is not something which is mystical, spiritual, or revelatory. It is scientific. That is very important. Meaning, it has to pass the criteria of science which involve objectivity, verifiability, repeatability. First is objectivity, that anybody else who does the same test under same conditions must get the same result. It should not differ from person to person. There should not be subjectivity involved in that evaluation. So the first criteria of scientific knowledge is objectivity. Second is verifiability. You cannot say that this phenomena is available only for 5 years. After that, this will cease and we can't verify.
Okay.
Second. Third is, it has to be repeatable. Anyone, anywhere in the world, under similar conditions, can come and repeat and get reasonably same results. So these three are very important. So when we look at PhD, we are generating new scientific knowledge, new as I defined it, and scientific, which means it has to pass the test of objectivity, verifiability, repeatability, and this can happen only if it is generated by what is called the method of science. That knowledge generated using method of science is scientific knowledge. Now, there may be other kinds of knowledge which may be revelatory, which may be intuitive, which may be artistic, which may be craft oriented, which may be belong to indigenous traditions. But they are not put under this PhD structure. We are looking at new scientific knowledge. That is one. Second, the third is, when we generate new knowledge, it may be of different types. It may be a path-breaking thing which nobody has ever known. That is one category of PhDs where you actually explore something and you bring into this world something completely unknown. That is actually earth-shaking for that area. That is 0.1% of PhD. 99% of the times PhD is done not because it has to bring out something earth-shaking, but it's a professional necessity for somebody. So 99.9% PhDs are done because somebody wants to become a professor or assistant professor wants to become an associate professor. Usually PhD is done by those who want to be in academics, consulting, or research. Outside of these areas, or some people have a fancy of having a doctor behind their name. Except for these, it is not necessary if you are into something very applied or social. So this is one part. Now we talk about the categories of the new knowledge. That it can be a PhD can be where you are genuinely generating new knowledge which does not exist, or you redo a PhD in a different context. For example, somebody has done a PhD, prevalence of schizophrenia in slums at Mexico. And then you do a PhD, prevalence of schizophrenia in slums at Delhi. So that is like revalidation PhD. You are trying to revalidate what has already been done, which is not acceptable. Many universities accept, but over a period of time, the acceptability has gone down. Most universities now don't want revalidation PhDs. And the second aspect of it is, when you use scientific method, you can use qualitative or quantitative. In India, Very few universities actually will go for the qualitative part. Most will demand a quantitative part, and by quantitative part, they will always go for something called the survey. They will not go for anything other than a survey. Now, this is the limitation of the university, not that of science or the scientific method. So, when we look at the PhD program, these are some of the things which are at the core of it, that we are generating new knowledge and new knowledge of scientific type using scientific method. Now, what happens here is, if we really want to do it very genuinely, it will go on for 3 to 5 years full time. But because most people don't have that kind of time or interest or even resources, people find shortcuts, and universities also accept it, and it rolls on. And we look at PhDs where, if we ask at the end of it, what is the output? Often people are confused, why I did a PhD, what came out of it? So right at the beginning, one has to be very clear that what will the PhD give in terms of output, for two reasons. One, two areas. What will be the academic output, and what will be the practical applied industrial output or policy output? So this is how the PhD program is all about. And at the center, when we talk about creating knowledge, it is, how do we create knowledge? By proving or disproving an hypothesis. That we find out some hypothesis worthy of exploration, which has not been done before, and then we prove or disprove it. One caveat: in earlier times, there used to be a slightly different format. Like, people used to do almost 2 literature surveys. The first was to find the topic, because you don't want to redo what somebody has already done. At that time, it was very difficult because you did not have internet, and all you could do was to go to 1 or 2 libraries which had limited access to what has already been done. Today, it is very easy in Google Scholar, in JSTOR, in EBSCO. So we can find out easily, sitting on our desk, what has already been done. But usually the earlier process was, you get enrolled into a PhD program, then you do 1 year of literature survey, you find out the topic which has not been done and is worthy of doing, and then you start with the topic, and then you do the second literature survey focused on the topic. Today, the format is slightly different. Today, you first register your title, then you go to introduction, then you go to literature survey, and the difficulty is that often in the middle of it, you realize the difficulties of finding literature or difficulties of finding data, and again you have to come back.
True.
And often the title has to undergo a change, because the title was never literature research in that sense. So this is a difference between the earlier approach of many universities and the new approach. The new approach almost calls you to do a 6-month prior research before fixing the topic, which is difficult to do because the PhD process without a guide is not a do-it-yourself kind of a process.
So you mentioned in between that there's some types, different types of PhD. So is PhD not a single type? Or if there are types of PhD, what are those?
There are different types. What we know usually is one type, which is what you and I would be doing. But there are other types also. So usually what we understand by PhD is called PhD by research, which is what you and I would be doing. There are other forms of PhD also, like, but one, as I said, is PhD by research. Second is PhD by submission. Let us say I have written 3-4 books in a particular area, and I submit it to
Hmm.
the university, that this scholarly work of writing the books is almost equivalent to that which is involved in doing a PhD, and can you evaluate it? And if you find it right, can you give me a PhD based upon submission? So that is
Oh.
called PhD by submission. Third is, you have something which is called PhD by practice.
Mm-hmm.
Let us say I am working as a researcher in Intel. I am designing new chips. Now, what I do in 3 years is far more than what a PhD student will do in an ordinary university. And I have done that probably 10 times in my life or 5 times in my life. So, if you look work to work kind of comparison, I should be having 5 PhDs. But I don't have it just because I formally did not register. But work I have done of 5 PhDs. So, in such situations, what happens is, if somebody is interested in coming to academics, then they register in universities and they submit a project that I will be working on this project for the next 3 years, and you can decide if the work is equivalent to a PhD work. And there is a committee in the university which says, okay, this is equivalent. You have to do A, B, C, D, E, and then we will accept. And like any PhD, every 6 months there is a review by a research committee, and then they do a project in the industry and submit it to the university. And like any other student, they get evaluated every 6 months and everything goes. And then they get a PhD by practice. And there is often a different,
As a child, I used to think this is how the PhD would be of practice.
right,
This is how I used to think that, whenever some new discoveries and research is being done, and then they find out that, okay, this is successful or this is the output of it, and then they would be enrolling. I used to think like that.
right. So this is PhD by practice. And actually, many times different nomenclature is used.
Okay.
Just say if you do a PhD, after that you write doctor, or you write doctor as a prefix and PhD
Hmm.
is a suffix. So let's say your
Hmm.
PhD is over, you write Bhavna Sharma PhD
Hmm.
or Dr. Bhavna Sharma. So either you
Yes.
write doctor in prefix or PhD in
Hmm.
suffix.
All right.
Now the prefix remains the same, but the suffix changes.
Oh,
Like
okay.
if you do a PhD by practice in management, you write DBA,
Hmm. Okay.
Doctor of Business Administration.
Okay.
So if you want to write Dr. dot XYZ, that is the same. But if you want to use it as a suffix, then instead of writing Himanshu Vaidya PhD, I would have to write Himanshu Vaidya DBA.
Okay.
So that is a different suffix for PhD by practice. And
Right.
if you do it in psychology, it is PsyD. So
Okay.
the suffix is PSY,
It's right.
yeah, P capital, SY small, full point, and D capital, PsyD. So many people who work in mental health institutions and register in PhD, they practice there, and as a part, they turn their work into a format acceptable to the university, and they do less of academic research and more of practice, and they get PsyD. Then there is uh, you have, okay, so we talked about PhD by research,
Yep.
PhD by submission, PhD by practice, and honorary PhD, where a university bestows a PhD upon you. That is by invitation, that is not actually by uh, demand or enrollment.
Demand.
So this often is honorary PhD, and usually it is given to those uh, who have contributed a lot, or often also to political personalities, celebrities. So Dr. Jayalalitha, the ex-chief, the late Jayalalitha, was endowed doctor, and she would proudly write doctor. She was very fond of it. She may have arranged it to be given to her, but there are some who are fond of this doctor as a prefix. So they arrange it, or the university gives it to them, and that's honorary PhD. Now,
So
usually,
how this doctorate and MBBS, usually nowadays this trend has changed. Doctors, medical practitioners, they have started writing medical consultant. They don't no more use doctor, but that is MBBS. So how in India when we say doctor, so people are generally jumping, oh, you're a doctor, as in you're a physician or you're a from the other aspect. They are not understanding the doctorate and doctor. Then how why they are using that suffix or prefix?
I think this is a mistake because the word doctor has traditionally been associated with a healer. So when we had these academic degrees, there was a need to have a new name, not this name. So I think that rather than changing doctor, it's better to change this PhD wala prefix because there is a confusion. Genuinely, there is a confusion.
Yeah, there is.
Like, doctor, are
But
you?
of lately, if you visit to any of the internationally recognized established hospitals, they are no more writing doctor. They're writing medical consultant and their specialization and suffixing with their specializations. They have stopped using DR.
Oh, it's something very new because there also there is a problem that you start writing doctor even at the bachelor's level.
Exactly.
MBBS is Bachelor of Medicine. It should be BM,
Yeah.
and Master of Medicine should be MM. And when you do a PhD, you should be writing doctor. So what you call DM actually is a PhD. So
True.
these are the nomenclature difficulties which I think sometimes people should look at it, but it seems people like confusions. So these are the different types of PhDs, and usually universities, when they hire professors, they make it very clear it should be PhD by research. And few universities will accept university PhD by practice, but practically nobody will accept the other two unless there is a outstanding author or outstanding creative person who has to be taken into the university. It's very difficult to get the other to accept it. So usually when we say PhD, we mean PhD by research.
Right. So how does the flow of it happen? Like how is the whole process?
Uh, Broadly, it can be part-time or full-time. It's of 3 years, but usually it goes up to 4 years. And if you want to really do a genuine PhD, it will be for 5 years. It also depends upon what category of university you go to. Ordinary university, you can finish it in 3 years, maximum 4 years. But a really good university will make you work at least 4 to 5 years, 5 years mostly, on a full-time basis. Because if you really want to do a PhD, it will take 5 years full-time. And
Mm.
often, uh, good universities only offer full-time PhDs. And when you do a full-time PhD, often you are supposed to undertake many of the courses along with the master's students and some courses which are specially designed for you.
Oh,
So they give you certain courses which enables you to do your PhD in whatever area you are. Suppose it's an interdisciplinary PhD you want to do, you need some courses in psychology, some in management, then you are put in those courses. Then there is this whole idea of skill development. How do you develop your tool? So good universities want you to develop your tool, not just use a ready-made tool.
okay.
And that itself takes 1.5 to 2 years. Literature review itself takes 1 year if you do it really well. So the flow is very, very different in a premier institute and an ordinary institute. Most people do it part-time in ordinary institutes. Premier institutes don't offer anything part-time, at least not at the level of PhD. And in premier institutes, after you are done with 3 years, most of the students, they start working with their guides in consulting assignments. So that gives them hands-on exposure, and it also gives them context. And when they come out, they can start their consulting practice very quickly because they're already entrenched into the industry by them. Or they go and make a lot of presentations in conferences. So attending seminars, conferences is a very much a part of it. That you're supposed to present papers in conferences. If not, you're supposed to go and attend conferences. And the ideal is at least one international and two national conferences per year. Obviously, it's an extremely resource intensive proposition.
True.
Most cannot afford it. And in all good institutes, the student who is doing a PhD actually is paid. And the payment usually is far more than the fees.
Mm-hmm.
So, because most countries in the world think of PhD and research as a social good, that somebody is doing a social good. They don't see it as somebody snatching something from society and climbing up. They see it as social good, and they make a lot of investments. Even in India, all the premier institutes, they could give very good scholarships. And then there are sponsored scholarships like Aditya Birla Group. They give very good scholarships in those who do doctoral programs in IIM Ahmedabad.
Mm-hmm.
And many other places. Many endowments have scholarships for different students. Many endowments have scholarships for doing researches. They part fund researches. And you fund a part of it and they fund a part of it. Many times the PhD gets sponsored because it may align with somebody else's objectives. Like, for example, you are doing a PhD in microfinance, and all the banks who want to go into microfinance want that data. So they may part fund your PhD. Or let us say somebody, say Coke or Pepsi has spent, say 50 crore rupees per annum for advertising, and they want to know effectiveness of it. And you are trying to measure the effectiveness of it. So they may part fund your PhD because the results are relevant to them. So the flow is usually you get enrolled. Different countries have different systems. In India, if you are NET passed, you enroll directly. Otherwise, you get into an entrance exam of the university, register yourself, attend a few courses, which is a part of the PhD. Some courses in statistics, some courses in how to do a PhD. And then find a guide, and usually the university gives a guide or you find a guide. Decide upon the subject and then start the usual process of PhD, chapter by chapter, introduction, literature review, and so on. So this is how it usually goes. And every 6 months, there is a review where you have to make a presentation before a research committee. And the research committee takes the final call of whether to grant you the semester and allow you to go forward or ask you to repeat the semester. So usually every 6 months, you present 1 or 2 chapters. That's how in the course of 3 to 4 years, or the 12 chapters, they get done. So it takes roughly 3 months for one chapter. Some chapters may take 6 months, some chapters may take more. But on an average, you present 1 to 2 chapters every semester. And that is how slowly that rolls on. Most people don't complete it on time, and there are many dropouts. If you really raise the standards and uphold the standards, you will have a mortality of almost 60% in a PhD program. Most universities don't dare to do it. So the mortality rate is practically zero. But if you actually tighten the screws, even in good universities, you will have a mortality rate of at least 25-30%.
Oh.
So it's a difficult process. It's not easy. It's very unlike bachelor's and master's. Because in creating knowledge, there is no guarantee that those ideas will come to you, that clarity will come to you, which will enable you to do something not already done and useful and meaningful. So there is a leap of creativity, a leap of insight, which is extraordinary, which is required. Many people can't make it happen and they have to drop out.
So, usually when we talk about PhD, we talk about two aspects as a layman: research and thesis. So, I
Correct.
believe a PhD ends up with a thesis. And what is the structure of this thesis?
Yeah. The final outcome of the PhD program is a thesis, and the thesis usually has a structure which is like this. If you go front cover to back cover, this will be the flow largely. Some variation across universities, but largely this flow. You will have the front page, then you will have 2-3 pages like plagiarism certificate, guide certificate, what you have done certificate, the research committee certificates, and so on. Then you will have the index, and the index usually will be divided into 10 or 12 chapters. Some universities will have different names, different addition, deletion from one chapter to the other, but largely the flow will be like this. That you will start with introduction, which will go into what is the background of the subject that you are dealing with, what is the meaning of it, how it has evolved, what has been the global context and experience till now, what has been the national experience and context, and what is the local specifics of the area where you are doing it. This will give broadly the introduction, and then at the end of the introduction, you will identify a knowledge gap. How do you justify your topic? So the introduction will end with what is your topic and how it is justified. So you identify a knowledge gap and you say, if I address this gap, there will be two outcomes: academic outcome and applied outcome. And this is why I'm doing a PhD. The whole thing is justified because it is giving X academic output and Y applied output. This is where the introduction will end. Then you will go to literature review. And literature review will go deep into your specific subject. And you will require at least 500 research papers and at least 25 theses around your subject, from which the rest of the literature review will go on. And that will tell you how people have addressed this issue before. Like what you are trying to do, somebody may have done already in a different context, in USA, in South Africa. Let me give an example. When I was looking at brand preference as my doctoral subject, I was trying to do it in the context of Coke and Pepsi in India. And I was researching the papers and theses. I could find theses like the connection of brand preference to price in the context of dairy industry in Africa. The relationship of brand preference to celebrity endorsement in Mexico, in the tobacco industry, cigarettes. So the same concept of brand preference was explored in various different ways in terms of the concept and the context. Right? So you link some concept to this brand preference, that if I am trying to explore brand preference as a variable, it will be linked to various concepts. Some will link it to price, some will link it to celebrity endorsement, some will link it to quality, some will link it to after sale service, some will link it to availability.
Basically, you fix your fixed variables and independent variables.
Yeah.
You
And then
get a list of those.
Yeah, and then when somebody has a dependent variable and a set of independent variables he's trying to explore, the whole thing is applied in a particular context, which is the context of an industry, the context of a city, and so on. So there is a geographical context and there is a customer context or respondent context. So this is something that we have to go to in literature review, and literature review ends with a list of variables that what I want to explore, it is linked to this set of variables that I see in different papers. So I make a set of them, and then I do expert consultation to find out which of these are relevant in my context, and then I put that graphically that this is my variable I want to understand, these are the related variables. So this is the variable I want to understand, these are the related variables and the relationships of a particular nature. And this, when I put together, this becomes my conceptual model of the study. So the literature review ends with the conceptual model of the study. And from the conceptual model of the study, I derive my objectives and my hypothesis. And proving or disproving of the hypothesis is at the center of the PhD. Right? Because you can generate new knowledge, or you can explore a relationship and say there is no relationship between the two variables. That is also new knowledge. New knowledge does not have to be positive and affirmative. It may also be that you find out that there is no relationship between A and B. That is also new knowledge.
Right.
So there can be an affirmative finding of knowledge, or there can be finding of no relationship between the two variables. So this is the center of it. We are less than a minute. Let me look at the other chapters in the next part.
Continue the discussion to part 2.